Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Capricorn Group's first ever Digital Inspire session. Now, the previous 6 sessions were quite different and we were all able to meet face to face. This time around, things are a little bit different, and if this time has taught us anything, it is that change is the only constant. By embracing the inevitable changes brought about by this pandemic, we can adapt to new ways of doing things. Now, Capricorn Group over the years has become synonymous with these inspiring events featuring well-known celebrities and rousing conversations of mind-shifting potential. This time round, the group is zooming into mental health. As a connector of positive change, Capricorn Group truly believes that we all need some extra coping mechanisms to deal with the demands of life. That is why we'll bring to you today 3 experienced doctors who will share diverse aspects of mental health and contributing factors of mental health disruptions. They will help you to understand how to reach a balance between work and personal responsibilities to achieve psychological resilience. Now, a little background of the doctors. Dr. Marks is a super specialist general psychiatrist who has worked in the public and private mental health care for over 20 years. He has been in private practice for 11 years and is a committee member of the Health Profession Council of Namibia. His interests include psychodynamic psychotherapy, the history of psychiatry, mood disorder, and anxiety disorders. Dr. Mercy is a general practitioner with 8 years' experience in psychiatry, both public and private mental health care. Her passion is to improve awareness around mental health. Dr. Chido is a consultant psychiatrist who has worked in the public and private mental health care for the last 8 years, striving to improve awareness and reduce stigma towards mental health issues, as well as improve access to quality mental health care. She has a special interest in workplace mental health, women's mental health, and marital therapy. Now, the 3 doctors will inspire you to ascend to a new, more resilient you. Rise to the challenge and join us with these professionals in the field of mental health. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, share, and tag a friend. And get this, you will stand a chance to win one of our fantastic giveaway hampers. Right after this video, we will have, in this order, Dr. Gerard Marks, Dr. Mercy Tichareva, and Dr. Chido Ruafa Matamutse. Thank you so much.
From the beginning, the stars have filled Africans with wonder. Our ancestors did not just gaze upon their beauty as they stared up at the night sky. They used the constellations of stars for the measurement of time, seasons, cycles, and direction. One such constellation is Capricornus, called by ancient people the southern gate of the sun. It is from this constellation that the Tropic of Capricorn got its name many centuries ago, when the sun was in the Capricornus constellation at the time of the southern solstice. All lines of latitude have geographical relevance, but to the people of southern Africa, the Tropic of Capricorn is more. Spanning across the center of Namibia, it ties together the lands of southern Africa, receiving the brightest sun rays that are directly overhead on the summer solstice. It signals the time of abundance with flourishing offerings from nature. We took our inspiration from the Tropic of Capricorn, the band that symbolized abundance and created positive change for the people. This is what every single member of our organization strives to achieve every day, to find innovative ways in which to bring together our customers and their aspirations. We passionately believe that by connecting the people of this region to opportunity and prosperity, we can help in taking it one step closer to realizing its greatest self. Our humble beginnings in Windhoek were born out of a tenacious spirit of entrepreneurship. Since then, Our journey has led us on a path of achievements, growing us beyond Windhoek and Namibia. Rooted in the pillars of W for Windhoek, where it all began, the 3 lines of our logo represent our values of being open, dedicated, and inspired. We are proud of our logo that reflects our legacy and how we got to where we are now. And as before, we will always achieve our successes by holding true to our values. Along with this, we will continue to reach for the stars. Only now, we seek them in the eyes of the ones whose lives we've made better. Not only are we inspired by the dreams of those who call this beautiful part of Africa home, but we want to make these dreams a reality for them. The future shines brightly, and we will journey towards it as one. We are Capricorn. We are stronger as one.
Good morning, viewers. In the first place, I would like to thank Grace, and in particular the Capricorn Group, for giving us this wonderful opportunity to share some of our experiences in the treatment of mental health and hopefully break down some of the barriers that our patients face in accessing help and treatment. I should start with a disclaimer. I had to take psychoactive drugs to be able to be on this stage today. So I do practice what I preach. And I thought maybe to make this a bit more fun and to get us in a better mood to start with, I want to tell you a very brief story about Grace, our host. Now, Grace is an absolutely beautiful girl, as you saw, and she's very efficient. She started talking to us about 6 weeks ago already about this presentation, and we had several meetings. One of which was where she came to take some pictures for the flyer that went out for advertising the event. We thought it would be a very quick photo between patients, but Grace turned up with cameras and lights, and it turned into a major photographic session. And to start with, she was happy and smiling, and as this continued, I saw she's getting more and more stressed. The frown came out, and she was looking at the camera, gave us all sorts of orders: stand up, stand like this, move back, move forward. And you'll see my beautiful colleague who'll follow me in this presentation, a brilliant and beautiful woman. But if there's one thing she's not, she's probably not a basketball athlete. And so at some point, Grace said, stand up, please. And we all stood up. And Grace is now not looking at us, she's looking at the camera, and she keeps going, stand up, please, stand up, please. And it was only after a few minutes that my wife went, she's already standing up, Grace. So we had a good laugh about that. So, okay. I thought I would tell you about mental health, and in particular the stigma that stops some of our patients from getting the help they deserve. And I'll do that by telling you a story from my own life. This is a true story. And for this story, we have to do some time traveling. So if you could, in your mind, take yourself back to the year 1979. This is my first day of school, and those days kids didn't go to like kindergarten much. People were still debating whether that is a good idea or whether this is simply mothers who are trying to get out of raising their kids. And I think we've made some progress on that topic since. So no one really knew each other, and I ended up sitting behind this boy. We will call him Kwesi. It's not his real name, in the interest of confidentiality. And we got through the first few hours to first break, and I thought, you know, this is the guy closest to me. I'll try and chat with him during the break. And so I'm following out the door, and he got a bit ahead of me because I was just checking out some of the girls in the class. So by the time I got to him, I was already sitting down, and he took out this little bag, leather bag with zip, opening this up, and there were lots of sharp-looking instruments in there, a few syringes, and I decided, I don't think this is going to be my best friend, and went off and played with all the other kids. And at some point, I thought it's my duty to share with my new friends that we might be at risk here. And so we huddled together, and I told them about what I saw. And then we started speculating about what might have gone, what might be wrong with our classmate. And this is a small farm community, so the only sort of illness that we knew about at that stage, this is pre-Google and the internet, were stuff that the farm kids know from the farm, and illness that we read about in the Bible. So we're speculating. I still remember one guy said, I think this guy might have the rinderpest. And I still don't know what's the rinderpest, but I think it's mostly in livestock, not in human beings. The next guy said, I think he might have Newcastle's disease. Again, in hindsight, I saw this is only in poultry that you'd find or be at risk of attracting this illness. And then the one girl said he might be a leper. So at this stage, we were like really stressed out. And when we had to go back to class, this boy was sitting in the one corner in front, and the whole class now was bundling in the opposite corner at the back. Teacher came back into the class, and she said, well, why are you not in your seats? So the one voice said, Miss, I am far-sighted. I can only see what's on the blackboard. That time we still had the blackboard, when I'm a long way away from it. The next guy said, Miss, my grandfather used to sit in this very bench here in 1952. His name was Frikkie. And the teacher was looking at us, and by the time the one girl went, Miss, I think there's a gender bias creeping into this distribution of pupils in the class, so I volunteer to also sit in this corner. The teacher had enough, and she took out a big stick, like a gargantuan stick that she called Dr. Manners. It didn't look particularly well-mannered to me. It was a thick dowel, about this thick, and it looked like it still had bits of previous students, like maybe Frikkie's grandfather, attached to it. And I don't know if you remember, but teachers back in those days, they started speaking very slow when they got angry. And so she was saying, if you're not back in your seats within 5 seconds. She didn't have to finish the sentence. We worked out by then that we'd rather take our chances with Newcastle's disease rather than being beaten to a pulp with Dr. Manners. So I went back to my seat. Now I'm sitting right behind him. Take out my handkerchief, put it up, tap him on the shoulder with my ruler. Says, mate, what's up with the leather bag? And he turns around and says, no, don't worry, I simply have sugar disease, which was what the Afrikaans people call diabetes. So I kept my handkerchief up, and by second break I went to the rest of the group and I said, boys, I think we should be okay. As long as we cut sugar out of our diet, we should be okay. That didn't last too long, but the point is, back in 1979, we didn't know much about diabetes. Since then, there's a lot more information that's become available, that's in the general person's mind, and therefore people would not treat other people this way if they have diabetes. Now, if we come back to mental health, unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. There's a lot of stigma around mental health, and most of it is for the same reason as what you just saw in this example that I used. It's simply because there's not enough information out there, and slowly over time, with sessions like this, we will slowly break down some of those barriers. Now, I think that's only part of the story. Another part of the story with mental illness is certain cultural and religious beliefs that we hold in our community, especially in this part of the world. So another brief story I can tell you, and this only happened last week. I was working in Swakopmund. As a doctor, you get to do this. I could go in, see some patients for a day, and then come back here. But while I was there, I walked into a shop and paid with my card, and the lady there saw that it says Dr. So-and-so. She says, "What type of doctor are you?" I said, "I'm a psychiatrist." And she was busy, and she looked up. She went, I said, no, not that one. Most people who see me have depression and anxiety. And I had a whole speech ready, because I do this quite often. But while I'm speaking, she cut straight across me, and she said, "Yeah, no, doctor, but you know, us black people, we just say they are crazy, and we send them to the witch doctor. And then they don't get help." And at this stage, I was like gasping, trying to think of something to say. And there was a customer, a white lady, who was sitting in a chair, who said, "Yeah, but white people, they know better. They just tell them to go to church, and they don't get help then either." So I thought, my work is done here. These two people clearly understood what we're trying to get out, the message we're trying to get out, but unfortunately, in our work, we see this all the time, that well-meaning relatives and friends advise people who are suffering from depression, anxiety, to seek help in the wrong place. Now, I'm not trying to knock religion or cultural beliefs, but we would not advise someone with diabetes to seek help in these particular avenues. For some reason, we do give this advice to people with mental illness. And this is simply not helping your relative, not helping your friend. So please, I'll end with a few remarks on mental illness. Mental illness is common. It is not a failure. It is an illness. It is treatable with very safe medication and some other treatment modalities. So if you suffer from mental illness, please see someone, your general practitioner, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. If you don't get better, go back to your treating clinician, tell them you might have side effects, you might just not be improving. If they don't respond appropriately, see someone else. Please get some help. This is an illness. So at this point, I might ask whether there's any questions, Grace. I hope she's not going to beat me with a stick now.
Yes, there is a question, Dr. Marks. Yes. Thank you so much for that. So from social media, if you can just elaborate on something you mentioned. So it says, how do I deal with the stigma attached to the struggle with depression, especially in a community which doesn't recognize it as a legitimate illness, specifically those close to me, including my friends and employer?
Yes, that is a very good question because it is incredibly common scenario. Like I say, we see it every day. And for the individual, that is really difficult because the reality is, at this point in time, most people do not understand the difference yet. Yeah. You don't have to tell people that you have a mental illness. It is your private medical information. So if that is what you have to do, that is what you have to do. But know for yourself that this is a real illness, and sometimes it helps to provide close relatives that you trust with information like leaflets, which we hand out on a daily basis, so they can read for themselves and learn that this is an illness.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Grace.
That was great. All right, that was Dr. Marks. And up next, we have Dr. Mercy. We're really, really excited with what she has to give us. Dr. Mercy, you're welcome.
Thank you, Grace. Good morning, viewers. So now that we've talked a bit about the stigma surrounding mental illness, some of you may have questions like, what is it exactly, you know? And so just like the term physical illness describes a range of conditions from mild self-limiting conditions like the common cold to severe debilitating illness like cancer, life-threatening conditions like that. In mental health as well, the term mental illness also describes a range of conditions that affect your mental health. And when we talk about your mental health, or what we refer to is basically what your mind does, and your mind controls how you feel, how you think, and how you behave. So you will find that with mental illness, the mental illness is that condition which affects negatively how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. So you'll then ask yourself, so who gets mental illness? Because a lot of the times when we talk about this, or that example that's been given, you tend to think that it's far away, you know, it's somebody who's, I don't know, somebody else. They're always referring to somebody else when they're talking about mental illness and who is at risk. So if you can, if you noticed my colleague here, Dr. Marks, let you know himself that he has suffered from mental illness, and so anybody can suffer from mental illness. What are the risk factors to mental illness? So you will find that there are certain risk factors that we can address, and there are others that we can't address. And the importance of knowing your risk factors is so that you are proactive in seeking help, and you are able to know whether or not you're at risk from suffering from mental illness, and then do something about it. Because sometimes some of the common things that we experience are part of normal day-to-day life. So like I said, it's disruptions in the way you think, feel, and behave. And sometimes those things are normal. Like if right now, you know, when you're anxious about standing in front of people and talking to them, you feel certain experiences, and that is normal. But when it gets to a point where it disrupts your functioning and it stops you from being the best you, it stops you from being able to handle normal daily lives and the normal stresses that come about, then it becomes a mental illness. And so some risk factors that we can talk about include things like genetics. So it is known that mental illness tends to run in families. So people with relatives who have suffered from mental illness are more likely to suffer from mental illness than those that do not have relatives with mental illness. Things like perinatal factors, or the events that happen around the time that you were born, from the time of conception to the time after birth. Those events can have an impact on your mental health even years later when you're an adult. So you will find that studies have shown that even things like if your mom got sick of the flu in her second trimester, your risk of developing depression in adult life is higher than somebody whose mom didn't get sick. So you will find that there are even factors that we can't do anything about, and factors that factors like that you kind of feel like it happened so long ago, how can I be suffering now? But what those factors do is that they create a vulnerability in you. And so as you continue to grow and experience different things, you will then have more and more things that make you vulnerable until you are unable now to handle the life stresses and the things that go on, and you start suffering from mental illness. So you have different environmental factors as well that can increase your risk to suffering from mental illness. Environmental factors are those things that, like I said before, some of them are events that have happened during the perinatal period. One of the big contributors, for example, is exposure. While still a fetus, exposure to drugs, alcohol, smoking, all those things that affect pregnant women. So you'll find that maternal health plays a big part in contributing to the health of the child, even way into adulthood. So you'll find that those perinatal effects have a risk to mental illness. And then things like, right now you'll find that there are other things that contribute to mental illness as well. So ongoing illness, any form of chronic illness can increase your risk of developing other mental health problems as well. So a lot of people are dealing with other chronic illnesses. A lot of people are dealing with high blood pressure, diabetes, all sorts of things. And so you will find that all those things also increase your risk to suffering from mental illness. And then you've got certain stressful life events as well contribute to experiencing mental illness. So life events such as significant losses. The biggest life event that we are all facing right now is living in a time of a pandemic. And so you will find that this pandemic has, in a way, amplified the risk of suffering from mental illness. One, because of, in many different ways, because of the nature of the pandemic itself and the nature of how we've had to deal with this pandemic. So you'll realize that there's COVID-19 that is killing people right now. And so some people have lost loved ones during this time. And losing a loved one is a very significant life event that can lead to conditions such as depression or exacerbate even other pre-existing mental conditions already. And so the loss of loved ones is a big thing, and people are losing loved ones every day, and more so now in this pandemic. And then you will have things like even fear of getting sick yourself. So when you think about it and you think about how it's going to affect you personally, there's that fear of disease. So you'll find that people then struggle to deal with that, and some anxiety levels go up, and people continue to worry about whether or not they're going to catch the disease, whether or not they're going to die, what is going to become of their children, and all that stuff, you know. And this worry is very real, you know, it's not something that only affects a certain group of people. I remember having a discussion with Dr. Marks the other day about how, you know, people are responding to all this. And I remember it affected me personally, because when we were under lockdown the very first time and I had to go to the shops, you know, you would enter a shop and see everybody, and I would start to feel my throat closing up. I would start to feel my breath becoming short, and my chest was becoming tight, and I felt like I was having COVID symptoms, and I was becoming breathless. And I thought, what is happening here? But of course, I'm a scientific person, I'm a medical doctor. I know you don't just catch COVID by walking into a shop and already you've got symptoms and you're sick already. But it happened to me, and that was a response. It was my mind, responding to the real threat of getting sick from COVID and the effect of that to me and to my family. And so, of course, I was able to, get over that. And, these days, thankfully, I am able to go shopping without experiencing those symptoms of COVID, can I say. And funny enough, I talked to a lot of my other colleagues and friends and they experienced similar symptoms. And it was funny to think that, okay, so I'm not the only one who struggles with, things like this. So you'll find that COVID itself has affected in the nature of the disease. Now, there's been efforts in trying to contain the disease itself. And so we had to go under lockdown. And that meant isolation. And for some people, it was isolation from loved ones. Some people were locked down in countries that are not their home countries. Some families have been separated for prolonged periods of time because of this lockdown. And so you will find that social isolation is a risk factor for mental illness, for example. And yet the times that we're living in are calling for social isolation. So COVID is not only increasing the risk for certain things, it is taking away from us those things, those coping mechanisms that we use in order to give us resilience when it comes to mental health. So you will find that people now who used to find comfort in coming together, you cannot come together anymore. Even as you meet, you need to keep your distance. You can't just give that warm hug anymore because of what it might cause to you. But as much as we are trying to contain the virus, sometimes it is coming at the cost of our mental health. You will find that not only have we then shut down, but when things started to open up, we had to start learning homeschooling. I used to think I was a very patient person until I had to teach my children. And you realize that people who teach children are trained to do so. That is why they are so good at doing that. And it becomes very overwhelming, especially if you still have to work. So there was this whole work at home, and so you have to work at home and do, what you need to do, and you still need to be a mom, and you still need to teach your children. You need to be a children's teacher as well. And all that can be quite overwhelming and stressful, and somebody might find themselves not coping as well as they used to before. And then you will find things like, because of this lockdown as well, businesses closed down. And so the economy is experiencing a depression, and I find that people are also experiencing their own kind of depression. People are now having to deal with unemployment. And that comes in, that is also two-pronged in its effect towards our mental health. So when you're unemployed, for instance, all of a sudden you've got nothing to wake up to. You used to wake up and go to work, it gave you a sense of purpose, and now nothing. And so you will find that because of that, you might end up using other coping mechanisms. I've found people who had overcome their struggle with alcohol abuse, for instance, going back because they've got nothing else to occupy their minds. They can't deal with it in any other way. And so they use alcohol as their coping mechanism because that's all that's there, So not being able to wake up in the morning and have purpose, have something to do, can have an impact on your mental health as well. And then you will find that not only that, but then there is the financial stress that comes with being unemployed. You need to now think of how are you going to put food on the table? How are you going to pay your bills? You've got, all sorts of things, the mortgage, the cars, maintaining a certain lifestyle, and looking after everybody who's been looking up to you. So the mental challenges that come with the times that we're living in are very real. These challenges are very real. And so you will find that we are not as resilient as we could have been. And so even things like being able to go out with friends, exercise, travel the world, all those things have been taken away from us. And so now we need to change and start realizing that we need to be intentional about taking care of our mental health the way we are trying to be intentional about taking care of our physical health. So as we know, for instance, that we need to eat healthy and drink water and, exercise and all those things. Those things don't have an impact just on our physical health, but also on our mental health as well. So when we become more aware of how at risk we are of suffering from mental health conditions, we are better able to then address it and seek help. I find that a lot of the times when it comes to this, people feel like somehow seeking help for mental health is a sign of, I don't know, a failure or a weakness, and some people feel guilty for suffering from mental illness, And yet, when you have a broken arm, it's straightforward that you go and get it treated, because sometimes it is beyond you to be able to treat your broken arm. And so sometimes when your mind is not functioning the way that it used to be and you're not coping the way that you used to be, it makes sense for you to seek help as well and get that addressed. So for now, I will ask Grace if she's got any questions for me.
Dr. Mercy, I have quite a few questions coming in from YouTube and Facebook.
Okay.
But I'll read out two questions that seem quite similar, and then you can just see how you can address that.
Okay.
So someone from Facebook says, how best can one suggest to someone that they may benefit from seeing a mental health professional without seeming offensive? And then another question says, I suspect that my spouse might suffer from a mental illness that is affecting her. How can I speak to her about what I think is depression or anxiety? I've tried in the past, but she denies it, and it's negatively affecting me.
Okay. So I think the one thing that we can look at is, as highlighted by Dr. Marks earlier, that lack of information is one of the biggest barriers to accessing health. And so being able to get information in terms of what is depression, for instance, what are the symptoms of depression? And when you have that kind of information and look at it and say, okay, so depression is this and this and this symptoms, and is that something that I have or not? So you will find that there are resources, for example, on the internet. There's a very good website, Your Health in Mind, that you can look up, and that explains, mental illness. And so sometimes equip yourself as a person, equip yourself with information in terms of what is mental illness and what does that entail. And then so when you know that this is mental illness, then you can suggest to your loved one that, don't you think you're the way that you are struggling to sleep is not normal, or the way that you are unable to cope with daily lives, the way you're unable to get up in the morning and go. You used to be like this and you have changed. Remember, we talked about how it's a change from that affects your behavior, your emotions, and your thoughts. And so you can bring up exactly what they're experiencing, and these are common symptoms. I think my colleague will highlight those more in her talk as well, in terms of what are the symptoms to look out for in mental illness. A lot of the times it's things that we experience every day, but it is the severity and the duration that you continue to experience those things. So sleeplessness happens to all of us. But if it's been months that you've struggled and you cannot sleep without drinking alcohol, for instance, or taking some sort of sleeping pill, then that's a problem and it needs to be addressed. So it's everyday symptoms that you need to then highlight and bring out to people. And I see that with a lot of patients who will come and say, I once had a patient who came in with the spouse, and while treating and explaining their condition, the spouse says, that's exactly what I've been suffering from. I didn't know. I thought it was just normal to experience this, but it isn't actually. So getting information is very important.
And I guess what you just mentioned now about maybe them coming together as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that might be something as well, because a lot of people are struggling without even realizing it.
So there's one last question
Okay.
before you leave. It says here, can mental health problems that result from prenatal irresponsibility affect the child only later in life as an adult or only as a child? Maybe you can just elaborate on that.
Okay, so it depends on the prenatal influence, right? The severity at what stage. So we know, for instance, that from conception, the child is developing in the womb. And so as the child is developing, if the insult occurs at a critical time where the brain is developing in a certain way, it can then affect even at the time of birth or in childhood. So you will find that there are certain, like I said, mental illness is very broad. And just like with physical illness, you've got children who suffer from physical illness from birth, whereas others develop physical illness later on in life. It's the same with mental illness. Certain influences, if severe enough, will affect you soon after birth or as a child, and then others, which are milder in form or depending on how they've affected your brain, can only occur later on in adult life.
Perfect.
All
Thank you
right.
so much, Dr.
Thank
Mercy.
you.
That was a great presentation. There you have it, audience. That was Dr. Mercy. And up next, we have Dr. Chido. Dr. Chido, you are welcome.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you to my colleagues who've come before me. And I'm going to continue this discussion about mental health, but I'm going to focus more on the workplace. We thank the Capricorn Group for bringing us here, and I would want us to also talk about how mental health interacts with our work. Work is good. We spend a third or more of our adult life at work. We spend at least 8 hours every day, Monday to Friday, at work for those who are privileged to actually have work to do. And work is a normal part of a productive human life. It's also therapeutic in a sense. It helps us to structure our lives. It allows us to have regular purposeful activity and gives us a means by which to contribute meaningfully to our community and our society, and gives us a social group outside of our families. When we were in lockdown, I think all of us noticed that if you were told not to come to work anymore, you had part of you missing, a part of you which was missing. Work gives us a sense of personal worth and value, and the work community can really give us a positive impact in our lives and mental well-being as well. However, work can also be an ideal setting for early identification of mental health problems and then facilitation for people who need to get help when we need to get help. Work can also be stressful, however. And balancing home life and work life can be very stressful. During this season that we've been in, we've all noticed that you've had to sometimes work from home, work remotely. How do you balance that when you're in quarantine, the children, the work that still needs to be done, the meetings? And the current uncertainty has also worsened the stressfulness of the situation. When stress is excessive and it's chronic, it can trigger certain mental health problems, which I'll talk about, or worsen existing mental health problems. There are some of us who have already been struggling, and then we come into this situation and then we're even more stressed, and the mental health condition gets worse. Common reactions that we might have when we are excessively stressed or chronically stressed, particularly in the workplace, I'll start talking about burnout. So burnout is a workplace syndrome where you feel fatigued. And it's not only workplaces. Sometimes even if you don't go to a formal job and you're a stay-at-home mom, you can still struggle with burnout. You can be emotionally fatigued and tired all the time. Even if you sleep, you wake up feeling tired and you feel exhausted of the work that you're supposed to do. You're not as motivated as you used to be. There might be changes in attitude, and this is what is normally noticed by HR at work, that there's now cynicism and changes in attitude. And that might actually be a sign of burnout. There might be decreased productivity. Again, that's noticed in the workplace. I'm there, but I'm not as productive. Sometimes it's hard to figure out because you might be present, but not present. It's called presentism. It's worse than absentism, because if I'm not there, then people know that I'm not well, and I'm not there. But I might be present, but my mind, my emotions are not involved in the work that I'm doing. That's presentism, and it costs companies a lot of money. Then another problem that might come about is anxiety, particularly in this stressful period we're in. Worry, worry, worry. When are things going to be normal again? When are schools going to open completely? When are we going to get back to normal? When am I going to be able to fly out and see my family? That's all very stressful. When am I going to be able to get back to a normal workspace? Are we ever going to get back to a normal workspace? That's all very stressful, and you can become anxious. And you feel tense all the time, and you find it hard to calm down, to wind yourself down. Think about it. Could you be anxious? Panic attacks. These are episodes of extreme anxiety with lots of physical symptoms, headaches, dizziness, shortness of breath. Many times when people have panic attacks, they actually end up in an emergency room hospital, emergency room at hospital, because they think there must be something wrong with my heart or my chest, something must be wrong, maybe I have corona. And think about it, have you had a panic episode? You may have. Depression is another common reaction to excessive stress. This is a sad or irritable mood, fatigue, decreased motivation that has lasted for 2 weeks or more, and it's just not going away, and you try and pick yourself up, and you try, but it's really hard for you. Additionally, you might have insomnia, you can't sleep, or you sleep too much. You might have changes in appetite, you eat too much or you eat too little. Your concentration might suffer, you might feel helpless, you might feel powerless and hopeless. You might actually even think about ending your life or thinking that death might be better. Could you be depressed? Think about it. Also, in this pandemic season, people have lost their lives, people have been exposed to this condition, and we also see a lot of things on the media, on the news, on Facebook, on our social media handles. And we might actually have been traumatized by it all. There have been various videos going around of people maybe dying in large numbers, people being very sick and being in ICU hospitals and ventilators. Sometimes you may be traumatized directly, but sometimes you might be traumatized by seeing another person suffer, even through a TV screen. And you might then suffer from psychological trauma. And you feel like you really live these experiences when you go to sleep. You can't go to sleep, or you have nightmares about some of the things you've seen or experienced. You might actually start avoiding watching the TV altogether, avoiding going to the shops, avoiding going to the hospital because you feel traumatized. This could be psychological trauma. Could you be suffering from psychological trauma? My colleague mentioned alcohol abuse. Sometimes we use alcohol and other drugs to self-medicate, to medicate our anxiety, to medicate our nervousness, to medicate our depression, to medicate any stresses that we might be having. And these are not only hard drugs, street drugs. Some of them are sleeping pills that you can get from your doctor or from the pharmacy. There might be pain medications that you might also be abusing. But if we're using them to medicate our psychological problems without proper assistance, we might need some help. I'll zone in again on alcohol. The recommendation says we're supposed to really only take 7 units of alcohol in a week. So you ask, what is a unit? A unit is half a pint of beer, half a pint of beer, not the whole pint. 10 mils shot of spirits, or a small glass of wine, emphasis on small. And you can't drink all of those units all at once, so you can't save them up for the Friday night or Saturday. That's called binge drinking. So you can't drink every day. I don't know how many of us are actually drinking like that. Could you have a drinking problem? Think about it. That said, again I'll ask, could you be suffering from a stress-related mental health problem? We need to become more aware of our emotions and develop what we call emotional literacy. And I think my colleagues have alluded to that. We have great understanding of physical illness, many of us. So if I come in and say, I've got a cough, I've got a fever and shortness of breath, what do you think? Maybe she's got corona. Maybe she's got a respiratory illness. If I come in and say I've got nausea and vomiting and diarrhea, you say, oh, maybe she's got food poisoning. She's got a tummy bug. So we can recognize the syndromes of physical illness, but we struggle to recognize the syndromes of psychological health problems. And you cannot really seek for help for a problem you don't perceive to be a problem. We often say, it's not that bad. I propose, let's get help before it gets that bad. Let's be proactive. Let's be proactive as individuals about preserving our emotional health. Let's become more emotionally aware of ourselves and others. Let's recognize our own emotions and what that means to me. If I feel a tightening in my stomach as I came in and had to do this presentation, what is that? That's anxiety. I should learn to recognize that I'm anxious. And I'm anxious because maybe I haven't done this sort of presentation before, or this is a new environment for me, and that's what it means to me. And then know when to get help. If I then decided I feel too anxious, I'm going to let Grace down, I'm going to not do this presentation, then it's affecting my functionality, and I might need to get help for that. Let's be proactive about our work-life balance. We are not machines. We need to balance our working lives and our families and our homes and our friends and our community. Let's work to protect and preserve our outside interests, outside of work, our relationships, our hobbies, our community activities. Let's learn to verbalize and ventilate our feelings when we need to. Pent-up emotions cause a lot of problems. Let's be proactive in our workplaces to create psychologically healthy workplaces. This also means the workplace promoting work-life balance. The workplace nurturing and protecting relationships. People will always be more important than tasks. We need to protect and preserve the relationships within the workplace. We may need to actually think about changing some of our workplace cultures. We do bring our emotions to work. In fact, we need to if we're going to really invest in the work and do a good job. So we need psychologically responsive workplaces. If someone is struggling and they break down and cry, we need to respond to that. And our culture in our workplace will either allow that or it won't. We need to also promote professional support networks. Right now, many people are working remotely, and that sometimes leads to professional isolation. You are working on Zoom, you're working on all of these media handles, but you're not interacting with others, and we may need to actually actively and proactively provide better support because of that. We need to also be proactive about providing pathways to mental health care. Many workplaces have wellness programs where we encourage our employees or our colleagues to get help for physical health problems. We also need to do the same for mental health problems and create a pathway to care when it's needed. Mental health is not a far-off issue. These are issues that are in our communities, in our workspaces, in our individual lives. So we really do need to start these conversations before it gets that bad. So with that, I'll ask Grace if we have any questions from our audience.
Dr. Chido, thank you. That was amazing. We have a few questions. So this is from YouTube. Someone says, medication for mental health, by his understanding, treats the symptoms of mental health. But don't mental health problems require mental solutions? So I also think maybe just to elaborate on that question is, I guess people think that it's just medication. So maybe you can just take us through just very basically, what is the process of, let's say, someone goes to a doctor? Is it just prescribed medication or what happens then?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think we also do need to highlight this because this is part of the stigma that we are having to address. If you feel you've got a mental health problem and you approach a health professional, you should get an assessment. So you're not just going to walk in and get a bunch of pills. You get an assessment, and that usually involves a really long conversation, at least 30, 1 hour, of really asking what the problems are, what the underlying problems might be, what the major symptoms are, and how they're affecting your life. And then the treatment plan will come from that assessment to say, okay, from this assessment that we've done, these are the major symptoms, this is what's bothering you, and this is how we can address it. We address mental health problems in a multifactorial way because the problems, as my colleague alluded to earlier, also come in a multitude of ways. So there are biological interventions that we do, and that involves medication. These sometimes change the neurochemistry of the brain that may, or reset neurochemical problems that we might be having. That's the medication. But then there are also psychological interventions that we do. So maybe that's where our viewer is talking about mental solutions. So part of the problem with something like depression and anxiety is also how you think about things that happen to you, how you respond to stresses. And that's something that you can learn to do differently, and you can learn how to do it differently. You can gain a better understanding of yourself and your past, and that brings clarity and helps you to deal with things better. And then we also have social solutions. So there are some people who may be suffering from common mental health problems like depression or anxiety, and they need maybe better family support, and that is a social intervention. So it's not a one-size-fits-all blanket approach to it. But we shouldn't be afraid of medications if they are recommended to us.
Okay, perfect. I have one more question for you. And it says, is there a way of targeting employers and HR professionals with this type of program? Because in the workplace, this type of exposure is still lacking.
I think that is partly why we are here. And kudos to Capricorn for being a trendsetter, because this is the sort of conversation that we now need to start in the workplaces. We spend a third of our lives at work. These problems are going to come up at work. And as HR, as HR, human resources, as administrators, as supervisors, as unit managers, we need to equip ourselves, get that emotional literacy to understand, oh, this is maybe what's going on. And before we got full on that disciplinary hearing, maybe we need to take a step back and say, what could be going on here? Can we handle this differently? In-house psychological support, getting peer counselors trained within the workplace, getting mental health professionals coming in to sort of supervise those peer counselors. That's all things that we can do. Those are the conversations we need to start, and I think we've already started.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. And I don't want you to leave the stage. There are still a few questions, about 3 or 4. So I'd like to do things a little bit differently. I'd like to call the rest of the speakers up on stage so that we can just look at these questions. And as you're coming up, I'll just scan through them quickly. All right. Let me know, am I standing correctly? Thank you. All right, so I have a question here that says, what coping mechanisms can I implement in my life during this pandemic to remain mentally sane?
I'll add something to that. I think something we haven't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on, which we should, is the exercise as a treatment for mild to moderate depression and anxiety. This doesn't need to cost any money, and it has so many other health benefits. There's a huge body of evidence for exercise as a treatment by itself. Probably not effective at the severe end of the spectrum by itself, but it will always add value alongside some of the other treatment modalities. So I think that's really important. Unfortunately, lockdown has had a potential effect on that as well. People who used to go to gym and places where people train together is still closed as far as I know. But this doesn't stop you from going for a bike ride or a walk or jogging around the block, etc.
Anyone else want to add?
We can also use social media. I mean, there's lots of now, because people can't meet and train. A lot of YouTube trainers are now going live and exercising and all those things. So using social media to our advantage as well, and using that as well to stay connected. So the video calling and the chats and all that stuff are important. So let's work with what we have to realize that we can still reach out to loved ones, maybe not physically, but definitely we can still talk and connect with loved ones.
Most definitely. I'll go on to the next question that says, do you think both mental and spiritual health could be connected, and could challenges in one area have symptoms in the other?
I'll take that and I'll say, if you look at the definition of health, health is not just the mere absence of disease, but it's physical, it's emotional, it is spiritual well-being. So spiritual health is part of health in general. So we can't separate spiritual aspects of a person or their spiritual beliefs from them as an individual. So it's important that we incorporate that and in the treatment.
Okay.
So as we respect, if you come to see a mental health professional, we respect your spiritual beliefs. But we also help you in terms of improving your emotional literacy, like we talked about, to say, maybe I actually didn't know that this is also a physical health disease. And then we can then get both the physical health interventions that we do, and then you can then continue with other spiritual pursuits. We know that the spiritual health, in terms of us having a community in our spiritual community, is also very important. And that has continued. Many churches, many religious groups have continued to meet online, and that should be part of that. But I think we need to also be open-minded that there might be things we don't know. And when you get to know them, you might actually be better off.
Great. All right, another question here. Because we work for majority of our day at work, don't you think our employers, this is a very interesting question, says, don't you think our employers should look at increasing the medical aid portion for psychological wellness?
Oh, yes.
Yes, definitely. I think this touches on stigma a lot because people feel like mental illness is not an issue. Physical illness is more important. So you will find that people then don't, even medical aids will discriminate against you in terms of access to mental health and what you can and cannot get on your medical aid, for example. So because as we raise awareness like this, the decision makers, when it comes to these things, hopefully will also get the message and realize how important mental health is. Yeah.
I would also like to point out that if you look at this in the bigger psychosocial scheme of things, you have this trend where illness of people who are rich and powerful tend to get more money when it comes to what the medical aid is happy to pay for, how much government is happy to budget towards hospitals. And over all the ages, people with mental illness have not had, due to the nature of the illness, a very strong voice. If you have a heart attack, it's probably because you are working too much, have too much money, etc. And people like that have strong advocacy groups, whereas some people with mental health, their functioning is going downhill, and therefore they end up not having a strong voice. And this is what we need to change in terms of that.
So I'll look at about 2 or 3 more questions, doctors, then we are good for today. I think, Dr. Chido, you touched on this, but maybe you can expand a little bit more. So a viewer has asked, can managers get help to reset ourselves to paying more attention to teams' well-being than just their output tasks, than their task outputs?
Yeah, I think I said it. People will always be more important than tasks. You can get more out of someone who feels like they're cared about and that they are part of the team. So that is a change of, it's a paradigm shift where, yes, the outputs we're looking for are ABC, but how do we get to ABC? You might have to now find a different route.
Yeah.
And it's very important that we look at a person holistically. When someone pitches up to work, it's not just this facade, it's everything that is behind me that also needs to be thought about and incorporated within the workspace. So I'll say something about, we talked a bit about women and maternity. Maternity leave, let's say. So if a workplace does not provide for maternity leave, what do you think about the psychological impact that would have on a woman who's leaving a 2-week-old baby at home? Are they really here? Are they present? Or are you forcing them to choose between the two? So it's something, I know it's controversial, but I'll throw it out there. We need to think about that, and that's how, and it's a big problem, but within our workspaces, we know some of the small problems, the culture issues that we have, and that's something that we need to think about. It's a paradigm shift. Someone comes, if you want the most out of someone, they have to bring their whole self to work, and we have to care about the whole self. So it's a change of thinking and approaching. And also creating the space for that. So in terms of workspaces, some of the things that work are meetings. Some people call them Melu meetings, where you're saying, what's the vibe like at the moment? So it's just a meeting where people chat about how are we feeling.
That's nice.
Yeah. How many workplaces do that? Where you sit down and say, oh, after this, maybe after this event, how are you feeling about that? Did that go well? How did you feel about that? That might be something that we need to start talking about, but it also requires emotional language. So back to emotional literacy.
Thank you so much. So I see that there's a lot of coaching that needs to be done in this area for employees and employers both. This is a comment, a very interesting comment. So I'll just read it before I go to the last question. Not to put the doctors on the spot, but can't you give Capricorn Group staff a discount on the copay? I'll just leave that there, but I'll move on. Yeah, so you got that.
Advocating for themselves.
All right, so the last question is coming from myself. The expense of actually going to see mental health professionals, I don't think you guys really touched on that. What if, some people don't have the money even for consultation? I'll just throw the ball in your court. What do you suggest in such a situation? And I mean, our population, we have lots of people that are living in poverty. Only probably a small portion of our population can actually afford actually going to seek mental health advice. So what would you say about that?
I think it can be addressed at different levels. For one thing, what we're talking about in terms of advocacy for mental health, so that government, for example, can provide and equip resources. So we do have like a mental health center at the state, for example, but we know that it's ill-equipped. Usually state hospitals are not as well equipped, and especially mental health hospitals are not as equipped, right? And so you will find that it is because of what Dr. Mark said about how there isn't enough advocacy for that. And so people feel like it's expensive and it's not worth it. But when you then look at the hours spent away from work, the unproductive hours, the number of times that somebody reports now to an emergency center for a panic attack and using resources for a panic attack that could have been saved for a proper heart attack, for example. All those things are things that need to be then taken into consideration. And so you will find that what is important to you, you invest in. So it's the same with a broken arm. Getting an operation for a broken arm is ridiculously expensive, but people find the resources for that because you cannot function with a broken arm. And so the same way you cannot function optimally if your mind is not okay and if you're not mentally well. And so there is that need to apportion resources appropriately at government level, at organizational level, and even at individual level. Because you may find sometimes someone says going to the doctor for this is very expensive, but you can look at some of the other things that they afford for themselves that they consider to be necessary. So I think it also goes to what we prioritize as individuals.
Okay.
I think I'll add to that. The WHO has got a great way in terms of arranging mental health services.
Did you say the WHO?
The WHO, the World Health Organization. They've got a pyramid approach to arranging mental health services. Right at the bottom is self-care. what we've been talking about here, that's going to prevent a lot of problems. So self-care is the biggest chunk. And then as we get narrower, then we get what we call frontline services. So frontline services might be general practitioners, might be the nurse at the local clinic, who are might be the HR director at work, or the HR officer at work. The first person who sort of says, there might be a problem here, let's talk about this. Then we then go into specialist care, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, which is higher up in the hierarchy. So it's also important in our organizations, as we think about it, to think about self-care, improving self-care, improving the skills of frontline workers. Because obviously investing in a psychiatrist is very expensive. But it's important that we also look at it in that way. But that said, again, advocacy is very important.
Yeah.
I think thank you very much for doing this, because this is part of advocacy. Every person who is going to see this is going to then hopefully speak about it. And already our voice has been amplified, and that will hopefully help to provide, to improve the services available. And just that emphasis that there are services available at state free of charge if someone cannot afford. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
May I make a
Sure.
last final comment? As from my story, I think you could see I'm old school and old and from a different generation. I remember my grandfather who, when they told him that my mother was planning to drive a car and training with my dad, he laughed his head off. He could not see, he didn't even think that is legal. And I think if I told him at some stage that I would work with two colleagues like this, who are doctors and so elegant speaking and so smart, I think this is another barrier we, I think, address today. And I'm so very proud of working with them. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity, Grace
You're welcome.
and Capricorn.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, lovely viewers. Those were our doctors for this Inspire session on mental health and the workplace. Thank you so much, doctors. You may step down. That was Dr. Marks, Dr. Chido, and Dr. Mercy. Now, as I alluded in the beginning, we had a few prizes for some people that were quite engaging on social media. So I am announcing them right now, and we'll make sure to get back to you on how to get these lovely hampers to you. This is compliments of Capricorn Group. So the first winner is Kauko Shivolo. I hope I'm saying that right. I repeat, Kauko Shivolo. Well done. The next winner is Kauna Kasiku Unona. Really, really well done. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Kauna Kasiku Unona. You are the second winner. And the third and last winner is Mac D. I'm not sure how you say it, but it's pronounced M-A-C-D. So Mac D Molosankwe. Let me repeat that again. Mac D Molosankwe. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us. From me, Grace Livendau, and the rest of the Capricorn Group staff. Until we meet again for our next Inspire event, it's bye-bye.
Let's take a walk together through precious milestones lined with fear and uncertainty. You learned, you bonded, celebrating life's little victories whenever they came along. You practiced over and over and over again, pursuing perfection, persevering through hardships, never losing sight of your vision, your dream of a better world, building relationships for happily ever after, shaping a brighter future for all together. No matter your journey, we are here with you every single step of the way, because yours is a relationship worth banking on.
Thank you.